13 million people in the UK now live under some form of local lockdown. Will the government come to regret bullying us all into the offices and giving us cut price discounts to go congregate in pubs? That's the main story we're going to be talking about tonight. I'm joined by Aaron Bastani. How are you doing, Aaron?
I'm doing extraordinarily well, Michael. Thank you very much for asking.
That's such a joy to hear such an enthusiastic answer. I can see you've been doing your bit with your prep cup there.
Yeah.
Keeping the economy moving, helping out.
Over the trenches, risking life and limb to save. Actually, it was once my New Year's resolution to never buy a drink or sandwich from Pret. And I did pretty well. It was like 4 or 5 months. But I don't live in London anymore, so for me it's like a rare treat.
Yeah, I can see that. I haven't bought a coffee in months. I've saved quite a lot of money, not quite enough to buy a house. The whole sort of like millennials, if you stop buying avo on toast and coffees, it doesn't quite work. But it does, it does save you a bit. I'll tell you what else we're going to talk about tonight, which is why no one in public life, government, journalists, anyone, can seem to understand how many tests the governments are doing. I've delved into the figures and I can't explain it. I feel like I understand it for the first time in a few months. Like how many tests are actually being done, what kind of tests, the difference between capacity and I feel like I've sort of delved into the primary sources again when it comes to coronavirus.
You're back. It's like this is like the Walker COVID masterclass returns.
It's the second spike, just in time for it.
The sequel.
We're also going to talk about Priti Patel's war on cocaine, Joe Biden's transatlantic beef with Boris Johnson, why Joe Rogan has backed Julian Assange, and why some of the liberal commentators you might expect to be fighting his corner have gone so notably silent. We'll also tell you what job Tom Watson fell into after leaving his career in frontline politics. As ever, give the stream a share and let us know your comments by tweeting on the hashtag #TyskySour. First story. From this morning, residents in the northeast are banned from meeting people outside their households, and there is a 10 p.m. curfew on restaurants and bars. Today, it was announced that from Tuesday, similar restrictions will apply to residents in Lancashire, Merseyside, Warrington, West Yorkshire, Halton in Cheshire, and Wolverhampton. All in all, restrictions across England, Scotland, and Wales mean more than 13 million people in the UK are living under some form of local lockdown. There was also briefings overnight that we could be heading towards a national lockdown. So this was reported in the FT that scientists on SAGE, that's the chief scientific body advising the government, have suggested a 2-week UK-wide lockdown over the October half term to keep COVID-19 from spiralling out of control. The idea there being that if you do it over half term, that means that kids will only miss 1 week of school as opposed to 2. And the scientist on SAGE who spoke to the FT said that if the R number continued at the same level as currently, it would break the NHS, adding that the test and trace system was, I quote, creaking at the seams. The prospect of a national lockdown dominated the political interviews this morning. Let's take a look at how Matt Hancock handled the grilling from Kay Burley on Sky.
Question still remains, Health Secretary, if I may, given the criteria and all of the information that you have at your fingertips, and you're looking at it ahead of later on today, how close are we this morning to a second lockdown next month?
Well, what I would say to you and to your viewers is that the virus is accelerating. We've seen that number of hospitalizations increase and double every 8 days over the last...
Several times, Health Secretary. You've said that several times. My question, on behalf of my viewers this morning, is how close are we to a second national lockdown, given all the information that you have at your fingertips on a minute-by-minute basis?
And my answer to that question is that a national lockdown is the last line of defence, and we want to use local action, and we want people to follow the rule of 6 in order to avoid it.
How close are we, though? If they don't, how close are we to a national lockdown? Do you not know?
Well, Kay, the thing is, I want to avoid a national...
I understand that. Everybody does. So how close are we, though? What do we... is it... If we carry on as we are, that we will be in a second national lockdown? What's the answer to my question?
my question.
Well, we do need to bring the number of cases down, but the answer to your question is that we keep these things under review. I can't give you that answer now, as you well know.
It's a sometimes bizarre, quite terse interview. That's not the only clip from Kay Burley versus Matt Hancock we're going to show you today. The other one actually is sort of even more awkward and slightly more confusing. A development from Matt Hancock's statement this morning came this afternoon when Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, made his own statement about the prospect of a future national lockdown. And we can go to the Guardian copy, which will have his quotes within it. So asked about the possibility of a 2-week October half-term in order to bring in a short lockdown, Mr. Johnson told reporters, "What I can certainly say about parents and schools is we want to keep the schools open, and that is going to happen. We want to try and keep all parts of the economy open as far as we possibly can. I don't think anybody wants to go into a second lockdown, but clearly when you look at what is happening, you've got to wonder whether we need to go further than the rule of 6 that we have brought in on Monday. So we will be looking at the local lockdowns we have got in large parts of the country now, looking at what we can do to intensify things that will bring the rate of infection down there, but also looking at other measures." Aaron, I want to go to you now. I'm going to, actually, no, first of all, I'm going to bring up just one statistic from the Office for National Statistics. You hold on one more 30 seconds. So the Office for National Statistics today released data that said that there are 6,000 new cases per day. So this is based on their serological study of the whole population, random samples, compared to 3,200 per day a week ago. So that's a massive increase in the daily cases. And I want to put a political question as opposed to an epidemiological one to you, Aaron.
That's good.
Which is Rishi Sunak going to come to regret making himself the face of Eat Out to Help Out?
Plausibly. I mean, it did save enough businesses that, I mean, it's a really difficult question. I mean, we'll find out. I think, you know, there is an argument to say you could have had Eat Out to Help Out during August. You sort of want to accentuate profit margins and revenues during the summer months. Let's say this is with us for 3 or 4 years, which we hope it isn't. That's probably a strategy you would want to continue with. I think the big mistake has been not exercising enough caution during the autumn to winter transition, which, you know, the idea that, for instance, people are now talking about, like you say, this 2-week half-term measure. Why wouldn't you just do that in the first place? Making half-term 2 weeks would have been a really simple, cheap, effective way at addressing this. And I feel like that's the kind of question people will be asking. Why do we send kids back to school in such a manner, which is almost unthinking, rather than Eat Out to Help Out? I may be wrong.
It's a question of priorities. I mean, I think it should damage Rishi Sunak's career. I think the idea that when we should have been preparing to get kids back to school, which means that we shouldn't have been, you know, doing any unnecessary social contact, really. If you needed to, if your emotional well-being, go for it. But the idea we should have been actively seeking to go hang out in public places during the period when we, you know, absolutely needed the spread of virus to be low, to me just still seems ridiculous. I want to go to another bit of information from the ONS, from that ONS study, because we listed out a number of regions which are going into local lockdowns already, or where local lockdowns have been announced. Included in that was not London. But if we get up this graphic, it's figure 3, you can see that London is actually the area with the second highest number of COVID cases per the population. So you can see that in London, between 0.15 and 0.2 people are currently testing positive for coronavirus. So it's still not that widespread, but it's on the increase. And I would expect London to be hearing of new restrictions imposed soon, because otherwise that looks a bit anachronistic that we've got many places with a lower prevalence than London having those restrictions put in place. I now want to get up a tweet from the BBC, and because I suppose the question I posed to Aaron was, is this going to do harm to Rishi Sunak and the Conservative government in general, that they were so, I suppose, gung-ho in their commitment to getting the economy moving just before we reopened schools and universities, just before the real crunch point, which was make or break for Britain's coronavirus strategy. And going by this tweet, they're going to get off the hook. So this is Daniel Sandford. He's Home Affairs correspondent for the BBC. And he tweeted today, "Liverpool is just an example of how the number of COVID-19 infections has ballooned in a fortnight. Everyone really needs to start remembering all rules, hand washing, masks, distancing, minimizing unnecessary contact. How did we forget so soon?" And that comment is obviously partnered with a map of Liverpool with the rates of people testing positive for coronavirus increasing dramatically from 14 days previously. And why that tweet rightly raised eyebrows is because this BBC journalist, Home Affairs correspondent, it's not an insignificant job, he has looked at a dramatic increase in COVID cases, and who has he blamed? The public, exactly who the government wants you to blame. Everyone really needs to start remembering all the rules: hand washing, masks, distancing, minimizing unnecessary contact. Now, he's put in there, minimizing unnecessary contact. How did we forget so soon? We didn't forget. We did what we were told, which was to go out and spend money in social places, in pubs, in restaurants. So the idea that you've now got the BBC blaming the public for doing what they were told, apparently actually we were supposed to ignore the government in August and continue taking their advice from May, and now we're seeing a second spike. It's us to blame. It's not good journalism. What planet is this man living on, Aaron?
I mean, I don't know about you, and I don't know about our viewers, but I've never seen so much hand sanitizer everywhere. I've not seen, people going into shops, going to the gym, and they'll apply 4 or 5 coats of this hand sanitizer. Everybody's wearing masks. Well, 90% of people are wearing masks. People are engaging with these measures more than ever. That's natural because, we're further into this thing than we were a week ago. And I think every passing week, people will internalize these kind of micro measures as kind of like a second nature. So I completely agree with you. For him to say something which is just categorically untrue, speaks to clientelistic journalism. And, it's about that government strategy as we saw right from the beginning of this thing. Personalise rather than politicise. Because if you personalise, it can't be political. And of course, it is political. We have a government which is administering this crisis, and ultimately they hold power of life and death over 65 million people, right? You can't equate what they can do to what I can do if I just wash my hands. And if that was the case, then how come somewhere like, South Korea, Japan has fewer than 1,500 deaths? We have 50 to 60,000 deaths. Clearly, sanitizing your hands and wearing a mask, great, we should all do it. But that's not what's gone wrong in Britain for so many people to have died.
I mean, especially if you think about just that example of people wearing masks. Now, where I live, people seem to be predominantly following the rules when it comes to masks. But where are you not supposed to wear masks? Restaurants and pubs, the one place where the government has been telling us it's our national duty to go. So you can't, you could wear a mask in a restaurant, but it would be difficult to eat. And it's not the advice. So anyone who is sitting in restaurants and pubs without a mask on is following government guidelines and is, actively, maybe they went to that pub because they were actively encouraged by the government. It does now seem ridiculous to let them off the hook for what we are about to see, which is seems like a dramatic increase in cases of COVID-19.
You said cases have doubled in the last 7 days. What would that indicate as to the R rate?
People are saying the R rate is around 1.4.
So it was 1.7 last week.
I can't do the maths in my head. Well, 1.7 was the figure from an Imperial study.
Right.
I think that was sort of the upper limit. That was one of the higher predictions. I think Sage was saying somewhere between 1.2 and 1.7. Today I heard 1.4 bandied about. So we're in between 1 and 2 basically.
Right.
But I suppose you can see if it was 3,200 a day last week and it's 6,000 a day this week, it's doubling almost every week. So if it continues at the same rate, we'll have 12,000 a day the following week, and then
24,000.
Good.
And then 48, and then 96.
Very good. Right. We're going to go on to our next story, which is not so much about client journalism, but more about confused journalism and also confused government ministers. It's hard not to blame them because it is on testing and the government have made this as confusing as they possibly could. Before we do that, please do share the show link and tweet on the hashtag Tysky Sour. We've also had a couple of super chats, fivers from Harriet Kane and from Ch2263. Thank you very much. Oh, and Emily WB with £8. We love you, NM. Michael, please would you wish my boyfriend, Josh, happy birthday. I can't be with him today because guess what? My mum's test result isn't back. Wow. Not only is this, I love giving birthday wishes. Happy birthday, Josh! But you've managed to make the birthday topical. So congratulations to you there. I hope that test comes back so you can, I suppose, spend the day after your boyfriend's birthday with your boyfriend. That's a bit of a tongue twister there. Right, let's get on to testing. Failings in the government's test and trace system have dominated the news this week. But after days of grilling on testing figures, government ministers still can't get the basic facts right about how many tests the NHS is currently doing. on Question Time last night, Nadeem Zahawi got himself in a muddle under scrutiny from Fiona Bruce. Let's take a look.
The average distance someone has to travel for a test has come down from 6.4 miles to 5.4 miles, but the in-person tests, where the results are then delivered within 24 hours, has also come down to 64% today with the data. So, I'm not sort of sitting here trying to hide away from the challenges. We've got to do even better. And our target is to get to 500,000.
Can I just pick you up on that 240,000, Nadeem? Sorry, but the government's own figures, the latest figures, are that 81,000 people are being tested every day. That's the government's latest figures.
Well,
not 240,000, 81,000.
The figures I have here with me. And
that's the capacity. But 81,000, according to the government's latest figures, the 2nd to the 9th of September, 81,000 a day.
Well, the figures that I've got is that 240,000 is the latest figures.
Is what the average of people are being tested every day?
Well, no, this is the capacity in the system.
We know about the capacity, but in terms of people who are being tested, which is what everyone here is if you want to test, the capacity is kind of irrelevant. If you can't get a test, it doesn't matter what the capacity is.
Well, as I said, so there are some challenges. So the 90% of people can get to a testing facility within 22 miles of where they are at. But we have to do better, which is why we're increasing capacity to 500,000 by the end of October.
So, I mean, you almost have to feel sorry for Nadeem Zahawi there. He's been sent on to, the most high-profile politics show in the country. He's been given a number. He's read out the number. And the moment he's challenged on the number, he just completely crumbles and tries to change the subject because he sort of looks slightly terrified. Matt Hancock, again, this is with Kay Burley again. There was another sort of confusing exchange where various numbers were bandied about, and it was very unclear what was what. Let's take a look.
Present test and tracing figures, 2nd to 9th of September, 250,000 capacity, 81,000 people actually tested. Why bother telling us what the capacity is? That's like me saying, my capacity is to run a marathon, but I'm pushed to run 5K around the park.
I'm sorry, I don't recognise the figure that you give. The capacity...
Figures are incorrect.
Was, as you say...
Incorrect.
You've quoted figures that I simply don't recognise. We're doing over 200,000 tests a day, and we do have that record capacity, but we have seen demand increase, absolutely.
Sorry, let me just take you back on that. 250,000 tests a day are being carried out, and then they go to the lab, and how many of those 250,000 are actually being tested in the lab?
The measure of the number of tests done is the measure of how many are done through the lab.
You're saying that 250,000 tests are done every single day at the moment, and give or take a few, all 250,000 are being tested in the lab.
I'm saying that the capacity is just over 250,000. This week, over 200,000 a day are being done, and that's at that.
What do you mean by being done?
Levels. I don't recognise an 81,000 figure that you point out,
Okay,
but there is
sorry, because this is really important. This is really important, and I thank you for taking the time to clarify. 250,000 tests are done every day. Tested. How many of those are then taken to the lab and subsequently tested in the lab?
The measure of the number of tests done each day is the measure of how many are done in the lab. There is a figure for capacity, and then there's a figure for the number actually processed through the lab. And the just over 250,000, that's the capacity. And then the number done has been over 200,000 a day each day. That's across the UK. That's both the Lighthouse labs and those done in the NHS in all 4 nations of the UK.
I mean, there was so many awkward silences there. I kept having to, I suppose, check with Fox that my earpiece wasn't broken. A very awkward piece of television, very confusing. My interpretation actually is that Kay Burley wasn't that on top of the statistics, and Matt Hancock either wasn't on top of the statistics or the government quite like us to be confused. I'm going to make us less confused because I think I have worked out where all of these figures have come from. So 81,000, this is the figure that both Kay Burley and Fiona Bruce brought up. They said that from the latest government statistics, this is how many people are being tested. Matt Hancock, I think, kind of stupidly said, I don't recognise that figure because it is a figure from the government. He could have just explained where it came from. Instead of explaining where it came from, he said there's an average 200,000 tests being processed. Capacity is much higher. Let's go through these one by one. So the 81,000 claim is about the number of people tested, and it's from this weekly report from the NHS Test and Trace England. So this is from the dates 3rd to the 9th of September, and this was only released yesterday because there's a bit of a lag when it comes to the data that records how many people have been tested. And so in that document, you can find between the 3rd of September and 9th of September, 571,400 people were newly tested for coronavirus, an increase of 27% compared to the previous week. Now, if you divide that 571,400 by 7, you get 81,000. So that's where this figure has come from both Kay Burley and Fiona Bruce. You can see the massive difference between the number of tests which are done and the number of people who were newly tested by looking to see that over the same period, 1.2 million tests were processed, or that's 179,000 a day. So massive difference. Both of those figures are just for tests which tell you if you have coronavirus. So this isn't a case of people, putting in a load of antibody tests or testing swabs twice, one because it went in the nose, one because it went in the throat or whatever. This doesn't actually seem that conspiratorial to me. Now, 81,000 as well is probably an underestimate because this is people who were newly tested for coronavirus. It doesn't include people who were tested also last week, potentially because they're care workers or health workers, or people who are kind of hypochondriacs, so send off their tests all the time. Now, so that's the 81,000 that Matt Hancock didn't recognize. He could have just explained it, and I think this would have been, much more useful for everyone involved. Instead, what he did was change the subject to, again, a legitimate bunch of statistics. And this is the daily number of tests which are processed by the government. So you can find these on the government dashboard. So you can see that the daily number of tests which were processed in pillars 1 and 2 was 233,199 in the last 24 hours. Testing capacity, slightly higher, but not that much higher, at 250,000. You can also see from that dashboard that the number of tests done has been increasing quite dramatically. So it is now up to, as Matt Hancock said, over 200,000 being done a day. That's the 7-day average. Now, Aaron, I kind of want to put this to you in that, Matt Hancock there was kind of right. I mean, the government is doing quite a lot of tests now. They are, on an average basis, over a 7-day period, averaging 200,000 tests a day. And I looked this up. This isn't It's not 200,000 because they're counting the nose swab and the throat swab separately. They're counting those together. It's not because they've dumped in a load of antigen tests. This is all pillar 1 and pillar 2. So this is people being tested for coronavirus, either in hospitals or in these testing centers. They could just be standing up there and saying, look, this is how the statistics work. This is where the 81,000 figure comes from. And I feel like people would potentially appreciate what they've achieved in terms of testing numbers, but instead they go up there bamboozling people with bizarre numbers, and suddenly they have, no one has any confidence in what they're saying. And I find, from a political strategic perspective, I'm wondering how they're managing to fuck up the communications on this so severely.
I don't know. Unless they want a sense of confusion. I mean, that's my sense generally, is that with chaos reigning, it helps them. But I agree with COVID-19, I would think the opposite is true. I think generally speaking, with Brexit, for instance, your opponents, you want to kind of just bamboozle them with so many different counter positions and a new news story every day. And I completely agree. With COVID-19, it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. I think it probably speaks to the fact that, the extent of the crisis has just completely overwhelmed government, and there isn't really a sort of strategic communications plan. They haven't really got the frontline politicians to deal with it. Like they've had Sunak, they've had Boris Johnson. He had COVID, right? I mean, like we were saying on Wednesday with Prime Minister's questions, it looks like he's got long COVID. Although that said, the guy could barely form a sentence at the best of times beforehand, so sometimes it's difficult to discern. But it's true. When it comes to presentation, they are struggling. And it is, and they keep on returning to this. We're producing and performing more test results than any other major European country. It's true. I mean, that's partly because we also, we had a severe crisis last time round, and there's a bit of a kind of panic stations with the reopening of schools. That's why we're doing so many tests. It's important to say. It would have been maybe smarter to stagger the opening of schools. But yeah, there does seem to be this strange question of, for once the Tories are doing a half-decent job, and they're sort of underwhelming through presentation. Normally, as we all know, it tends to be the other way around.
You might be wondering if you're hallucinating. Why have you tuned in to Tysky's Hour on a Friday night and me and Aaron are saying the government have actually done quite a lot of tests? You might even be wondering if this means we agree with Jacob Rees-Mogg. Let's take a look at him speaking in the House of Commons yesterday.
But the issue of testing is one where we have gone from a disease that nobody knew about a few months ago to one where nearly 250,000 people a day can be tested. And the Prime Minister is expecting that to go up to 500,000 people a day by the end of October. And instead of this endless carping, saying it's difficult to get them, we should actually celebrate this phenomenal success of the British nation in getting up to 250,000 tests of a disease that nobody knew about until earlier in the year. That is a success of our scientists, our health experts, and of our administration. And yes, there's demand for more. Yes, supply exceeds demand exceeds supply, but it is growing. The supply is increasing, and what has been done is really rather remarkable and something we should be proud of.
You've probably guessed we don't agree with Jacob Rees-Mogg. The government are doing quite a lot of tests, but the idea that people should just shut up and tolerate the chaos that we're currently witnessing is just as ridiculous, right? So the reason, I mean, as Aaron intimated before we watched that clip, the reason that the testing system is at collapse is, as the government say, because demand has increased. But the reason demand has increased is not because people are just feckless and addicted to getting tests. It's because, as we just said, the government opened up every aspect of the economy at exactly the same time. So they encouraged people back into offices. They opened schools, they opened universities, and they pushed everyone back into pubs, all at exactly the same time. And what happens then? You get loads more contacts between people, and that means you get loads more people who get symptoms of coronavirus, even if it's not coronavirus, they have to get tests. Loads more people who think they've just been in recent contact with someone who's got coronavirus, they want to get tests. So the fact that we are at this period of system collapse, and for people on the ground, that's what it feels like. You've got people who can't go back to work, can't go back to school because the testing system is down. You've got people driving to empty car parks because they were told they could get a coronavirus test, and then it turns out that the outsourced company, Serco or whoever, have upped sticks and gone to a different town. So this is complete chaos on the ground. And it's chaos that the government made themselves, and which, contrary to Dido Harding, she's head of test and trace, she said it was unforeseeable that there could have been such an increase in demand when schools open. It was foreseeable, which is why we've been saying for the past few months, yes, open schools. But if you're going to open schools, don't open everything else at exactly the same time.
Yeah, some really simple stuff could have been done to avoid all of this. A 4-day week. That's the first thing. Encouraging remote and shift working rather than saying don't do remote working. Just ludicrous. Like you say, staggering different parts of the economy. So maybe primary schools go back in September, secondary schools in October, universities maybe November. Half terms, make it 2 weeks. Like really simple things like this would have made a huge, huge difference. And that all could have been modeled by very smart people, right? And we could have worked out what would make the most sense and so on. Who could not have, I just find it absolutely ridiculous. We're throwing millions of pounds, not even at solutions to this, Michael. We're throwing millions of pounds at communication strategies, right? Oh yeah, we want to do a clever meme for people to wash their hands. Yeah, give them £800,000. You don't have to pay anything for somebody to say, hey, let's have 2 weeks for half term. It's kind of like a quasi lockdown for young kids, right? We have the week off anyway. I don't quite understand. This is a government that loves low-cost, low-tech, quasi-authoritarian solutions, right? Because it fits in with sort of Tory ideology, and it's cheap, and there isn't much money when you're running a deficit of £350 billion. So again, I think it just. I don't like to I don't want to repeat Sir Keir Starmer QC's leading attack lines, but it does kind of does suggest we're dealing with quite incompetent people. And I don't like talking about incompetence because, we talk about politics and interests and things happen because it suits some people but not others. I don't think there's a big lobby out there that says we can't have 2 weeks for half term. Really simple, cheap solution. Nobody's talked about it.
You actually, earlier in that intervention, gave me a nice segue to the next section because you were saying that the Tories love cheap, simple, authoritarian solutions to social problems. And we have a great example of this coming up next, a ridiculous example of this coming up next. Before we go to that, do subscribe to the Novara Media YouTube channel. As you know, Tysky Hour goes live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 p.m. Aaron Bastani's The Bastani Factor goes live every Tuesday. at 7 p.m. And we also do have some special shows which go live at unusual times. So if you hit that notification button, you will find out about those. For example, tomorrow we have 2 streams going out. One is at 5:30. I'll be hosting it. It will be about 6 months of Keir Starmer with James Schneider, former advisor to Jeremy Corbyn, with Dawn Butler, MP, and with Patrick Maguire, one of the co-authors of that now much shared book, Left Out, full of gossip. That's going to be a very interesting conversation. Great panel. And then in the evening, what time does the quiz start, Aaron?
I believe, is it 8:30?
This is why you need to hit the notification button, because we have a quiz with TWT tomorrow. I'll tell you the time at the end of the show, actually. 8:30 probably.
I'll butt in a second and say, I'll look on my phone while you carry on with the show.
Perfect. Priti Patel has announced her support for a policy to force companies to do regular drug tests on their staff. Speaking to The Sun, Patel endorsed Sean Bailey's proposal for a drug testing charter requiring firms to do regular anonymised tests of their staff for illegal drug use. According to the plan, according to the charter, results would be published regularly to identify firms with most users. Sean Bailey is, of course, a Tory candidate to replace Sadiq Khan as London mayor. So of the plans, this is a quote from Priti Patel speaking again to The Sun. She says, "I back any techniques that will reduce drug crime. Drugs affect everyone, whether it's in the city of London, whether it's in places of work. I've also seen it outside of London and in our cities. I've seen it in my own county of Essex, parts of my country where there are middle-class drug users effectively using county lines and children as runners." Now, I mean, it's a funny policy. I kind of doubt it will be implemented. But again, you can see clearly the political buttons that Priti Patel here is trying to push. She's now isolated a social problem that everyone disagrees with, county lines being used to sell drugs. And she's blaming, I mean, it kind of seems here sort of like liberal cosmopolitan. Anyway, it's not going to be resolved by having mass drug tests of companies. The Sun says, we're going to go to The Sun because this was a Sun story. We don't normally use them. But it's quite entertaining to go to their opinions sometimes. So about this policy, The Sun says the county lines gangs are a scourge. Home Secretary Priti Patel is right to target, but forcing firms to drug test staff is not a policy Tories should champion. It's not just the extra burden and cost it loads on businesses without any proof it would cut middle-class cocaine use. It's another sinister assault on ordinary people's freedoms. Just this week, we have also learned of plans to record any alcohol intake by pregnant women on their child's medical record. Meanwhile, the government is urging us all to become COVID narcs, snitching to cops on parties next door. This disturbing authoritarianism is the trademark of left-wing regimes. It's shocking to see Tories advocate it. Do you know of any left-wing regimes that have, tried to get companies or nationalized organizations to do mass drug testing of their staff?
No.
Let's go on to our next story. Anyway, this is ridiculous. It's a ridiculous policy proposal. It's not going to happen. It's just Priti Patel virtue signaling to say, I'm going to take on middle-class people in their inner cities, even though she's going to do everything in her power to make sure that people on high incomes don't pay more tax. I suppose the only reason, to be honest, that she's probably putting this forward is because she knows it's never going to happen. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to work out why the Sun are against routine cocaine testing, but they don't mind the authoritarianism of the hostile environment, the authoritarianism of the scapegoating, of the vilification of people who claim benefits, because Sun journalists take quite a lot of cocaine, but they mainly do have the right to work here and quite a lot of money, to be fair, to be honest. Right, before we go on to our next story, you know that Novara Media is only possible because of the kind support of our regular donors. If you are already one of them, thank you very much. If not, please go to novaramedia.com/support and donate the equivalent of 1 hour's wage a month. Very quickly, Luke Rogers with $4.99. What are your thoughts on Starmer's jobs economic plan and his response to the testing fiasco?
C+. Not good enough. Right, so he's done an incredible job. I mean, people say he's polling very well. I mean, okay, forget the polling, forget the instrumental logic. Is it what jobs? Do you see the Labour tweet, that image of the day? It's like, we need new jobs and to keep the other ones. It's like, wow, this is the country of Shakespeare right here.
All
really
right.
Inspiring.
Next story. This week, a high-profile transatlantic bun fight broke out between Joe Biden and the Conservative government under contention was Britain's plan to break international law and override the EU-UK withdrawal agreement. Let's take a look at the tweet from Joe Biden. So he wrote, "We can't allow the Good Friday Agreement that brought peace to Northern Ireland to become a casualty of Brexit. Any trade deal between the US and UK must be contingent upon respect for the agreement and preventing the return of a hard border, period." And there he is, quote tweeting a statement from the House Foreign Affairs Committee conveying a similar message. So the idea there, obviously, Joe Biden is saying he's got lots of Irish Americans who support him, who support the Democratic Party. They're saying, Britain, if you play hardball and bring about an outcome which the Republic of Ireland is unhappy with and many people in Northern Ireland are unhappy with, we are going to use that as a reason not to sign a trade deal with you. And this is seen as having, being fairly significant in this particular situation precisely because Boris Johnson, the Conservative Party, is saying we can play hardball with the European Union because if we have a hard Brexit with them, WTO trading agreements with the European Union, we can go get a better deal, a plum deal with the United States. And they're saying, whoa, hold up. It's not going to be that simple. Obviously, Biden might not win. I still think it's probably 50-50. But even if Trump does get a second term, you can see that the original tweet from the Foreign Affairs Committee that's in the House Democrats are also against a trade deal with Britain if they override the Good Friday Agreement. So that does seem to put a bit of a spanner in the works of Boris Johnson's plan for a hard, chaotic Brexit. The Tories, though, have fought back. This is a tweet from Conservative MP for Blackpool South, Scott Benton. So he writes, "Joe Biden is no friend of Britain. His Irish Republican sympathies and ignorant comments on Brexit and the peace process are another reminder of why he'd be an awful president and undermine our special relationship with the US." I mean, it's fucking ridiculous, this tweet from the Tory MP. And I mean, why it's ridiculous, we're not Joe Biden stands here. I don't necessarily think that if the House of Representatives, the Democrats in the House of Representatives think something's a bad thing, it's necessarily a bad thing. They've backed loads of awful policies, especially when it comes to foreign policy. But here, the idea that Britain could override the Good Friday Agreement, which they would essentially be doing if they override this agreement, they would be making a hard border on the island of Ireland inevitable, and removing the possibility of that border was the key element of the Good Friday Agreement. So, Joe Biden is making a good point here. And then the idea for a Tory MP to sort of say Joe Biden is no friend of Britain, his Irish Republican sympathies and ignorant comments, etc., etc., etc. Now, we mentioned on an earlier show this week that 5 ex-British prime ministers have come out against this proposal to override the withdrawal agreement. And again, we're not here to say, if 5 ex-prime ministers say it's a bad thing, it's definitely a bad thing. I mean, every living prime minister would agree on many fucking awful things. Yeah. But here, to say Joe Biden is an enemy of Britain because he agrees with 5 British ex-prime ministers, that does seem a little bit implausible.
Can I respond to the whole, the 5 prime ministers thing? And it's something we've seen a lot with Trump and with Boris Johnson. It's like, they're breaking the norms, the conventions of politics. And it's like, why is this suddenly a bad thing in and of itself? Like, Martin Luther King broke the conventions and norms of politics. The Labour movement in the early 20th century broke the norms and conventions. Keir Hardie, during a terrible tragedy, he talked about it, and I think rather than, he focused on the tragedy of working people dying rather than, God knows, it was the baptism of it wasn't the baptism, some ridiculous royal occasion, the birth of, some new, one of these children, distant relative of it wasn't even like, the heir to the throne or anything. And the whole of the chamber of the House of Commons are boo, that, and the convention was not to do that. So conventions are there to be challenged. And you're absolutely right. You could get the last 5 prime ministers and they could agree on, foreign intervention, austerity, all manner of things. But you're absolutely right. I think that the tone of this, it's one thing to say as a Tory MP that Jeremy Corbyn is a Republican sympathiser. The exact word, we don't want to sort of defame any Tory MPs, that's what they do on Twitter, and people like Ben Bradley and so on. The exact words were Republican sympathiser. It's quite clear what's implicit within that. It means effectively an IRA sympathiser. And this meme goes back a long way. I mean, it's also partly born in fact that, there was huge fundraising efforts by the Republican cause in the United States, in the big sort of Eastern Irish communities during the 80s, the 90s. That's absolutely true. But you can't make trade relations with the world's largest economy contingent on the hope that the president of the United States remains a Protestant. This seems kind of stupid and myopic and short term. And you know, the Irish community is pretty well represented within the Democratic Party. It has been since the Kennedys, really. And so, heaven forbid you have a Democrat in the White House, because they ain't going to take this crap. And I find it remarkable. All the talk of the special relationship. Actually, it's a shame we can't get up that tweet from Ian Martin.
We can get up that tweet from Ian Martin.
There you go.
Let's get up that tweet from Ian Martin. So Ian Martin is a conservative commentator. He's a columnist at The Times and edits his own right-wing online magazine called Reaction, which is a strange thing to be proud of. I mean, because to call the right the politics of reaction is normally seen as an insult. But anyway, he's embraced it. Let's get up this tweet from Ian Martin. He says, "Don't think anyone or anything could make me want a Trump victory. Must say, Joe Biden may have done it. Incredible cheek, his anti-Britishness, when consider UK help cooperation on security, intelligence, defence and fighting terrorism."
There was the Pelosi one as well, right? Did you see that?
What's the Pelosi?
He was like, "I'm yet to see any, compliments from Nancy. I've looked at their Twitter feeds, and I'm yet to see any nice compliments from Nancy Pelosi or Joe Biden towards Britain." It's like, we're a medium-sized power, 65 million people. Like, what do you want them to say? They don't care. It's not their country. They're not the people that elect them. Joe Biden will. He's from Pennsylvania. I'm sure he'll say a great deal of nice things about Pennsylvania. He doesn't care. This weird, where does this come from? The Second World War was 80 years ago. This is gone. This is history. There is no special relationship. There's nothing unique about Britain. It's a great country. I like it. We've got great parks. Love the great parks. I love the football. I like a pie. I think suet pudding is one of the most underrated foodstuffs in the world, actually. There's nothing special about Britain. And maybe a hard Brexit will be what relieves these people of all these misguided illusions they have about our status in the world in the 21st century.
Oh, yeah, Joe Biden is from Pennsylvania. I was thinking he's from Delaware, but I think Delaware, he's built up associations with Delaware whilst being... He was the senator for Delaware. Yeah. That's more than building up associations.
He's now hyping up his Pennsylvania birthright because, obviously, Pennsylvania's a swing state.
Yeah. Right, we're going to go on to our next story. Before we do that, give us a like. Helps with the algorithm and helps with our self-esteem. And I'm going to go to some comments as well. Oh, these are also quite good for the self-esteem. Paula Rue with a £9 super chat. "You're all beautiful and intelligent. Thank you for providing us with so much important news stories, opinion and information. Tysky Sour forever." Thank you, Paula Rue. Such a lovely comment. And lieu exquise. Maybe lieu means something. I'm not sure. "Amazing stuff on COVID statistics. Well-paid national journalists being schooled on the facts once more. They should be ashamed." I'm not a big believer in shame, but okay, if someone should be. And Andy Smart, $11.99 drug test Gove first. He'd fail. He's probably off the coke now.
Do you think he would fail still?
I imagine he's off the coke.
Do the hair test. That goes back 12 months. I bet he wouldn't pass that.
Right. What Tom Watson did next is our next story. Perhaps the best way to judge a politician's true self, their real values, is to look at what they do after leaving office. That's when they're no longer restrained by what might affect their re-election prospects or what might piss off people within their own party. So think of Ed Balls on Strictly Come Dancing or Michael Portillo making documentaries on trains. You could even think of Tony Blair making £5 million advising the Kazakh dictator and laundering his global reputation. This week, we found out the true spirit of one more frontline ex-MP, Tom Watson. That's the man who styled himself as a true Labour man, warrior against the establishment. Think Murdoch, think the pedo ring. He's now found himself... He wasn't in a pedo ring. He was against an alleged pedo ring. Just to clarify. That's actually one thing I rate him for, even if it did turn out to be misguided. But anyway, that's a distraction. He's got a job for Paddy Power. Right, so Tom Watson, to be more accurate, it's for an umbrella company called Flutter, and that owns not just Paddy Power, but Betfair, Sky Bet, and PokerStars. Now, both Flutter and Tom Watson are claiming Watson's role will be to help protect vulnerable gamblers, but trusting gambling firms to protect gambling addicts makes about as much sense as putting the Clintons in charge of Suicide Watch for Ghislaine Maxwell. Aaron, this is reputation laundering, pure and simple, is it not?
I mean, he's going to be on a retainer of not more than 6 figures. It was originally miswritten in the Financial Times to indicate it was 6 figures, but not £1 million. It's not. So we know it's less than £100,000, which would indicate it's in the high tens of thousands of pounds. He's earning a lot of money, but obviously, as he says in the press release, it's about helping people. I want to really help clean up this industry. Okay, we'll do it for free. Do it pro bono. Okay, do it like a few hours a month. He's not doing that because he's going to be paid a king's ransom to do it. And there's 2 points I want to make here. The first is this is about laundering the reputation of a disgusting industry. And these are the precise same people, by the way, when they talk about people from Novara Media or, people in the Labour Party or people on the left who might have a class analysis, who might think that society works the way it does because of interests, competing interests. They'll say, the Labour Party is based more on Methodism than Marx. You're working for a betting company. Take the word Methodism out of your mouth. By the way, Keir Hardie probably would have said it's a bit of both. Just unbelievable. A bit of Methodism. You've got him, you've got Michael Duggar, then you've got all the other people working for these major consultancy firms, Umana and Berger, and they're working for a consultancy which has done the most outrageous thing. Climate change denial, working for climate change deniers, working for people who go around breaking up grassroots unionism kind of endeavors in the US, particularly with Walmart. We're looking at the caliber of these people, and they couldn't be worse. And what's remarkable is, Jeremy Corbyn's gone. He's not the leader of the Labour Party anymore. That's fine. I'm not even stuck on it anymore. Great. Let's move forward as a confident left into the 2020s. But it's really important to say this. Jeremy Corbyn was the most principled, honourable person, human being in the Houses of Parliament by a country mile. And these exact same people, Michael Duggar, Tom Watson, Chuck Uramana, who got column after column, they got news time 24/7, 7 days of the week to denigrate that man. Actually, it turns out the interests they care about representing aren't working people. They aren't particularly principled. They want to look after the bookmakers. They want to go work for consultancies that are happy to deny the existence of climate change. It's a real parable for our times. How this honourable man, this uniquely good man almost, person in Parliament, was portrayed the way he was. It's almost like it does have a kind of a movie quality to him. It's almost incredible that people like Tom Watson were trying to assume the mantle of a country's conscience. And look, this is the real guy. This is the real guy. He goes to work for Paddy Power, and he's on a retainer in tens of thousands of pounds, and he dresses it up as some kind of moral calling. That's who you're dealing with. When Jeremy Corbyn leaves politics, what do you think he's going to do? It's a serious question. He might start a food bank. He might go start some kind of institute that helps people, right? It will be altruistic, believe me. For any other flaws or failings, you might not like the guy, you might disagree with him, you might not have voted for him. I don't think anybody thinks he's going to go work for the companies that the likes of Umana and Watson have worked for. And that says a lot about him, and it says a lot about them.
I mean, I think that is so true. And that is one of the things that you can't say the things you can say about the Labour left. You can't say the things about the Labour left that you can about the Labour centre, which is that they're just in it for the money and the power and the prestige because of what they go on to do afterwards. Like, you look at Tony Blair's cabinet, you've got Jeff Hoon, he was a defence secretary. He goes on to work for the defence lobby. And yeah, I mean, you've mentioned Michael Duggar. He's chief executive of the Betting and Gaming Council. So anyone who tries to suggest that what Tom Watson is trying to do is disrupt the industry from within, his closest ally in Parliament, he's not pretending to be helping the vulnerable gamblers. He is literally just the top lobbyist for those firms. He will be trying to, lobby to lower the regulations and the restrictions on these particular companies. As you mentioned, Chuck Uramana and Luciana Berger both go to work for Edelman, strike-breaking company. They're famous for laundering the biggest, baddest companies in the world who just want to make a profit but pretend that they are trying to do something differently. Angela Smith, lobbyist for private water companies. Chris Leslie, chief executive of the Debt Collectors Association. So if Michael Duggar and Tom Watson's industry makes you bankrupt, you might have Chris Leslie's industry knocking on your door, taking away your TV and the last of your possessions. That is the legacy of the Labour right. We're going to go on to our final story. It's a big one. I don't know if I've got anything to tell you now. Although this quiz happens at 7 p.m. I did find that out. We are now 2 weeks into the extradition hearing against Julian Assange. he faces 175 years in a US prison for the crime, or the alleged crime, of espionage. Of course, he was just providing public interest material to newspapers. It was an incredible thing that he did when it comes to WikiLeaks. Today in court, Jen Robinson, his defense lawyer, gave explosive evidence that Assange was offered a pardon by representatives of Donald Trump if he agreed to reveal the sources of the 2016 DNC leaks, so the leaks from the Democratic National Convention. Assange refused, and the evidence strengthens a narrative that Assange has found himself not accused of a crime by a normal legal system, but the subject of a political campaign by a US president with no respect whatsoever for the rule of law. And we'll have to wait and see, obviously, and whether the judge accepts that argument. And we'll be giving you updates as that trial goes along. What I want to focus on now, though, is not the legal arguments, the legal wrangling, which, to be honest, is slightly above my pay grade. I've never claimed to be an expert when it comes to extradition law. But what Assange's trial reveals about our broader political context, and especially the attitudes and reactions, the responsibility or lack of our liberal establishment. So we'll talk in detail in a moment about The Guardian. They broke so many of the stories that Assange leaked, and have remained relatively silent throughout this period of his trial. First, though, I want us to look at a clip of someone who gave his support to Assange this week. And it's not a liberal hero. It's someone who's usually thought of as an antagonist to liberals. It's podcast host Joe Rogan.
Julian Assange has literally been tortured. I mean, the guy was locked in that embassy for how many years with no exposure to daylight, just completely trapped. And you've seen videos of him skateboarding around the embassy. I mean, it looks like he's going crazy in there. And now he's in jail and on trial. The whole thing it's so disturbing because when it boils down to like what did he do that is illegal? What did he do that people disagree with, that people in the United States disagree with, in terms of the citizens? Well, he exposed horrific crimes. He exposed things that were deeply that the United States citizens are deeply opposed to, and the fact that is something that you in this country can be prosecuted for, that they would try to extradite you and drag you from another country. They'd kick him out of the embassy and bring him back to the United States to try him for that. It seems like we're talking about some kangaroo court. It seems like we're talking about some dictatorship where, you have these no protection of freedom of speech, no protection under the First Amendment, no protection under the rights of the press.
That was Joe Rogan speaking. We have to say, I agree with what he said there about Julian Assange. We don't know what the hell he's done to his studio. Quite a lot of ad money, I think that guy must get, and he looks like he's in a go-kart or something, or the Death Star is what Fox was saying.
Didn't Spotify pay $100 million for Joe Rogan, the kind of rights to the podcast?
That's what I heard, but it's still on my podcast feed, so I don't know.
It's
why
going over, I think, in November.
Oh, right, that makes sense. Well, maybe he'll get a better studio then. Maybe this is sort of in between awkward period. Yeah. I want to ask you though, why do you think that Joe Rogan makes better statements when it comes to Julian Assange than the newspapers which sort of declare themselves the brokers of truth and who worked quite closely with Julian Assange?
He doesn't overthink it, does he? I mean, people are saying in the comments he's a simpleton. I mean, he's the first to say he's not, immensely intelligent or, he's not particularly well read on many of these issues. He listens to what people have to say, and I think, and that's the quality of somebody like him. There's lots of voices like him, not nearly enough, but basically, in receipt of the facts, okay, what's he been charged with? Who else has been charged with that? What's happening to Assange is unprecedented. Using espionage law from 100 years ago to attempt to extradite a journalist. That's what that's what he is. That's what he did. The exact same charges could be used against you, me, the editor of any newspaper in this country, any BBC journalist. And so it has a huge public interest. And at the same time, he has this huge platform without necessarily being dependent upon a line manager or the head of the BBC or a political editor telling him what he has to do. The great line, of course, you've said it before, Chomsky to Andrew Marr. Well, Marr says, nobody tells me what to think. And Chomsky says, well, you may think that, but you wouldn't be here asking the questions if you didn't think what they want you to think. And somebody like Joe Rogan, to a lesser extent, people like us too, we're not necessarily dependent on the goodwill of certain people with certain opinions in order to have our platforms. That's the material explanation for why Joe Rogan is saying the things he's saying. He couldn't say that if it was a BBC podcast, because they're not permitted to say those things with that level. They might say, oh, well, maybe, there's the argument that, no, he's sort of heart on sleeve. This is bad. It's unprecedented. It's wrong. It should be resisted. That's quite rare because of the niche he occupies in media.
The thing with Julian Assange is obviously, if you look at the previous 10 years, there are lots of complications there. There are lots of moral quandaries that one might get into when discussing the record and history of Julian Assange. Yeah. But in this particular court case, it's really fucking simple, which is that someone is being done by the world's most powerful state for espionage when what they did was leak public interest information to mainstream newspapers. Yeah. To return to Joe Rogan quickly, I'm looking at some tweets. Are you planning to mention that Joe Rogan's also spreading lies about leftists starting forest fires on the West Coast? I don't know about that particular allegation, but what I would say is I'm definitely not here in any way to endorse everything that Joe Rogan has ever said. I wouldn't want to. I do want to now focus, though, on The Guardian. So as I've mentioned already, The Guardian was the paper of choice for Assange when he did some of his most explosive leaks, the Afghanistan papers, the Iraq papers. They were done through that newspaper. Now, you might expect that to mean that the paper has some loyalty to the person, or it doesn't even need to be personal loyalty, actually, because I don't think that's what this is about, but to feel some responsibility for when someone is facing 175 years in jail completely unjustly because of the kind of practices that helped your newspapers for standing for the kind of principles which you are supposed to embody to speak out in defense of that person. Now, I looked under the Julian Assange tag on The Guardian for the last week, and there are some news articles about this court case, but they're all just, fairly standard bland write-ups of what happened in court, many of them just copied and pasted from Reuters. There hasn't been a single leader in support of Assange, and there hasn't been any comment pieces devoted to Assange, apart from one in the lifestyle section by Hadley Freeman. And she does not take issues of press freedom particularly seriously. If you go by the contents of this piece, which she felt was so important to write in the middle of this extradition trial, I'm going to read you some sections from it. So it was in the Ask Hadley section, and she was asked a question from a man called Joel, who says, "We live in a time of so much insecurity, but is there anything we can expect from this increasingly ominous-looking winter with any certainty?" Now, I hadn't read the Hadley Freeman column before, so it's kind of weird how she gets to completely irrelevant answers from the question she was asked. But let's go to the answer. She writes, "Events may overtake us, but the cliches we use to describe them are frequently, one might even say reassuringly, predictable. I was thinking about this while reading an interview in the Sunday Times magazine this weekend with the lawyer Stella Morris, aka Sarah Gonzalez Devant, aka the mother of Julian Assange's 2 youngest children. Like Boris Johnson, it is impossible to get a precise figure on how many children Assange has. Funny how a shared peccadillo can really highlight the similarities between 2 seemingly very different people." She goes on, "The interview largely took place, as far as I can gather, in the Japanese Kyoto Garden in London's Holland Park, and Morris described how romance blossomed for her and Assange in the Ecuadorian embassy. Japan, Holland, Ecuador. Perhaps Assange is right, and we truly live in a world without borders now. Morris, 37, accompanied by her and Assange's 3-year-old and 19-month-year-old son, talked with feelings about Assange's possible extradition to the US. His extradition hearing began on Monday at the Old Bailey." She goes on, "Even now, I don't know whether my children will ever be held in their father's arms again." This is what the mother of the child is saying. To which one struggles not to reply, "Yes, that's incredibly sad for your children, but it is also not an entirely unforeseen turn of events, given you conceived them with a man avoiding extradition to Sweden to face 1 allegation of sexual assault and another of rape." She goes on to criticize Morris for saying those allegations against Assange have been politicized.
Well, I mean, even if somebody murdered my dad, who I love more than anybody in the world, I would still say they have a right to see their children in the future. I mean, you have to have something. I mean, that's kind of inhuman. It's kind of strange. Because forget Julian Assange. The kids should meet their dad. That's kind of odd, right? That's a really barbaric thing to say.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just I just think it's very telling because this article, it's a stupid article. I mean, I think the idea that when someone is on trial to be extradited for espionage when they leaked public interest information in the paper you are writing in, for you then to use this just as an excuse to mock their partner who's worried that their the father of their child is going to get extradited and locked away for 175 years is pretty callous. Whatever allegations were against Julian Assange in Sweden. But I think more importantly than Hadley Freeman's particular article is the fact that, as I said, this is the only thing, other than bland news stories, which are basically write-ups of Reuters reports, which has been in The Guardian over the last 2 weeks, which mentions Julian Assange and attaches some sort of opinion. This is the newspaper which published all of, or most of, his most significant leaks, public interest leaks, which changed politics in many respects. And now he's on trial for espionage. He's facing the consequences. No one at The Guardian did. And now all you can do is publish these sort of catty articles which take the piss out of the mother of his child.
And the children, fundamentally. I mean, they won a Pulitzer as well, right? I mean, The Guardian's global prestige was massively boosted. And, this has been a terrible time for The Guardian over the last 10 years in terms of the economics of the news industry. But after the New York Times, they've been like kind of the second most influential, most widely read online. I mean, I'm not including the Mail online because it's a paper, but in a very different way. Anglophone, English-speaking paper in the world. And that is in no small part because of their collaboration with Julian Assange. And it has to return again. We have to get down to the kind of nuts and bolts of the argument here. Even if you don't like Julian Assange, even if you'd like him to be incarcerated forever, free societies don't extradite journalists under charges of espionage. That's not how a free society works. I don't want to live in a society that does that. And the whole point of the rule of law and due process is it applies equally. You don't just apply it to people you like or that you get on with, right? It applies equally to all. And if we don't have that kind of system, then very quickly you live in an authoritarian hellhole. And so it's deeply disturbing. To be fair, many journalists have been very clear about this in terms of the extent of the consequences should he be extradited. It's not in The Guardian, but you very see it on social media and so on, people voicing quite clearly their opinions. It's a huge, huge case. There's a crisis of free speech right now in Britain and the United States. This is the number one case. This is the cause célèbre of freedom of speech and freedom of expression and freedom of the media that we've had in this country for a decade. And like you say, The Guardian, wow, what does that say about The Guardian? That the only piece of coverage they've got is Hadley Freeman writing about Julian Assange in order to denigrate the mother of his children and tacitly those children too. What does it say about The Guardian? You've got ambitions to be one of the most serious heavyweight, and there are some great people who work at The Guardian. What does it say about The Guardian when they're doing that? You want a serious publication if you're doing that. People can do daft tweets. Somebody has commissioned that, edited it, and it's been published, and then you're reading it. Wow. That's terrible.
I should just clarify, it's not the only piece of coverage, it's the only piece of sort of opinion journalism, the only piece of comment. And the coverage, as I say, has not really been sort of hard-hitting investigations, it's just been very bland court reporting.
Because nothing's really happening in the courts so far. I mean,
Exactly.
People are saying to us, why are you not covering the Assange trial more? Because we're only starting to get into it, as far as I can understand anyway.
We'll also, I think we should get on an expert guest for this, because I think one of the problems is I don't understand that much about extradition law. Do you, Aaron?
No.
We'll get you a guest for next
You're on
week.
first name terms with his lawyer.
Yeah, she's also in a mini documentary, which hopefully you will have watched already, The Extradition of Julian Assange. It's on our YouTube page. Great 6-minute mini doc with Yanis Varoufakis, Jen Robinson, who is his lawyer, Rebecca Vincent from Reporters Without Borders, Peter Oborn. Really great watch. I recommend you take a look at that. We're going to wrap up. First of all, Michael Christophis gives us $9.99. Thank you very much. Keep up the conversation about Julian Assange's extradition hearing. We need to save journalism. Keep up the good work, guys. Thank you so much, Michael. Means a lot. That is it for us this evening. Aaron Bastani, it's been a pleasure as always.
My pleasure. I think we should probably say to our audience, this show does start now at 7 p.m.
That is true. This show does always now start at 7 p.m. I think we had told them that before. It wasn't like we just sprung it on them, but it probably is worth emphasizing that fact. Tysky Sour, now at 7 p.m. What was I going to say next? I'm going to tell you that not only is Tysky back on Monday at 7 p.m., but we also have 2 events tomorrow on our YouTube channel. So the first, they're both with TWT, the World Transformed, great organization. Normally they do, real life events at Labour Party conference, and we have a great live event, obviously, for obvious reasons. That wasn't possible this time around. But in its place, yeah, we've got some streams for you. So tomorrow at 5:30, I'll be speaking to James Schneider, Dawn Butler, and Patrick Maguire, assessing 6 months of Keir Starmer and what leverage the Labour left now have with the QC as leader. Then at 7 p.m, so straight after that stream, we're going to be going into a quiz. I think it's going to be a fairly boozy quiz. Aaron's going to have a round on conspiracy theories. I think me and Ash are hosting. It will all be good fun. Owen's got around, Owen Jones. So that is not to be missed as ever. If you are a supporter of Novara Media, thank you so much. You make this possible. If not, please go to novaramedia.com/support and donate the equivalent of 1 hour's wage a month. Thank you for watching again. I've been Michael Walker. You've been watching Tysky Sour on Novara Media. Good night.